Ed here with a Digital Digest, and today I wanted to share a quick comparison between the Sony A6400 on the right and the A6500 on the left. Now, these are two very similar cameras. Of course, the A6400 just launched, $899 US, body alone. The A6500 has been on the market for some time, well over $1,000 at launch, still over $1,000 now, and it does have some core benefits that the A6400 lacks. However, the biggest improvement that the A6400 brings to the table is one I wish the A6500 did have on board, and that is the brand new autofocus system. So it's not so much that Sony has changed any of the hardware, it's more of what we get in the form of a firmware update, in my opinion, because now we have an autofocusing system, that really does leverage the hardware. Whereas with the A6500, we had the hardware, but the brains, the firmware, the software to utilize and take advantage of that just wasn't there. Also, Colorscience has changed. This is also true of comparing this camera to the 6300. The buffer has gotten larger on the 6400, but the 6500 still has twice the buffer headroom of the 6400. The A6500 does also have in-body stabilization, IBIS, so whether you're hand holding for shooting stills or video, a very big benefit. In fact, the whole concept of the A6400 being a vlog style camera, because of the only true change to its physical body, which is that the screen can now flip around, that to me in itself does not make this better for vlogging. The A6500's in-body image stabilization clearly makes it better for vlogging because anything you're going to hand hold is going to be smoother. Of course, the range of this screen on the older A6500, you see, that's as close as we're getting, which is not at all to what that can do. Also, the touchscreen on here, intuitive. You also have more capability when it comes to customizing. So you got to be careful when you close that. You always want to close it down first, otherwise you will clip the EVF. The customization on the A6400 is improved. If you want to see that, look at my update about the A6400 and eventually my full in-depth review. But the real difference in these two cameras really is what I've already discussed. The fact that the screen on the A6400 can come all the way around where it cannot on the 6500. And the buffer size on the 6500 is twice the capacity of that on the A6400. Beyond that, we have HLG 8-bit video profile on here, which if you're already using other cameras from Sony, you're going to appreciate that now you have a B cam that can fit in line. But then again, HLG is available on cameras, and I mentioned this in my comparison to the A6300, like this, the RX 100 Mark VI. So Sony has incorporated HLG into point and shoot. So while it's nice to see it here, I'm not blown away by that. But of course, pros, anyone doing paid gigs, or even hobbyists and enthusiasts that really want to have that ability beyond S-Log now do. Beyond all of that, the autofocus is really the differentiator. The fact that we now have a continuous real-time autofocus that tracks a subject from their eye, even soon pets' eyes, animals' eyes, down to the subject, no matter where it's moving in frame, is really the differentiator for the 6400. So if you need in-body stabilization, yes, eventually Sony, I imagine, has to come out with a new model to replace the 6500, which will likely incorporate the flip-up screen and, of course, bring this new autofocus, I don't want to say system, but science, because it is really firmware. After all, it is applied to the A9 as well as a even larger buffer than the A6500. I think we're going to see that in a future model. If you're questioning which of these two to buy right now with the present pricing, the A6400 appears to be the better buy because outside of the in-body stabilization and the larger buffer, the 6400 has everything else going for it in terms of that autofocus system and, of course, HLG and the flip-around display. Also, no record limitations on video anymore. Also, less overheating on video capture. So that's another big plus for the A6400 versus the A6500. Although I think the argument can be made, not for overheating, but for the time limit of the 2959, a little under 30 minutes, that really was enough for most users out there. So I don't think that's a big differentiator. When it comes to battery, they're both still using the same exact W battery. They both have the same speed SD card slot. So battery life, marginally better on the A6400. So it's not like the autofocus. It's not like lifting the video recording cap. It's not like having the screen. Battery life, fairly, very similar. A little over 300 shots on each of these, around an hour of video. If you have mixed use, those numbers are going to change. But from an overall usability standpoint, having that autofocus is the game-changing feature. Now, if you already own the A6500, I see no reason to pick up the A6400. On the other hand, if you own the A6300 and are looking at the A6400, I could understand drooling a little bit, but I still think you should be holding off for whatever is coming out to replace the 6500. You've already invested quite a bit of money. Again, this isn't a game changer. I just feel like this firmware update is going to become standard across the board. The flip-up screen is a nice add-on, but I don't see that as redefining the way you're going to use either of these as photographic tools, especially for vlogging. As I mentioned, the in-body stabilization here is more useful than that screen, because if you wanted to incorporate anything on the hot shoe, the screen is blocked. Even the camera's own EVF blocks, slightly obstructs the LCD screen. Beyond that, both of these are great cameras. You won't go wrong with either one of them, but there's no question the autofocus system in here, everything else aside, makes the A6400 a winner. I do think we're going to see dramatic price drops on the A6500, and even though the A6400, because of that new real-time tracking, which, by the way, it doesn't just live in the still world, it also works when it comes to shooting video, is a fantastic feature. Budget ultimately is what is going to push people towards one camera versus the other. And trust me, the day is going to come that the A6500 is going to be around the same price as the A6400. And then this will become a much more difficult decision to make, because people who are comfortable with having to do all of the manual settings to get the focus to hit right are going to want the in-body stabilization and the larger buffer. And then people who want the idiot-proof version that don't care about the extra headroom on the buffer or the in-body stabilization because they feel this camera is going to live on a tripod or a gimbal, they're, of course, going to stick with the 6400. And I think that is what really differentiates the two. Again, I would have liked to have seen more innovation out of the 6400, but I understand what Sony's doing here. They made the most affordable, high-performance, interchangeable mirrorless camera on the market. That's what we're looking at here. The A6500 is not that. It's more expensive, doesn't have the autofocus system, but it does have the buffer benefit. It does still have play memories if you care about that. You do still have a time interval here in order to do time-lapse. Like I said, you will have to complete that in post, something the A6500 can do in body. And again, it really comes down to what kind of consumer you are. So I think, on paper, it appears that the stabilization and buffer are all the 6500 has going for it over the 6400. And I can see why. That is what it really boils down to. But for a lot of you out there, those two features may be more important than the new autofocus system. And for me personally, what's most important about this new autofocus system is that it purely exists. It means we're going to see it on other cameras, not just here in the A6000 line, but in the RX lineup, in the A7 series, in the A9, of course. The firmware is already out. I believe it's already out. So that is what the A6400 really represents. It's that we're on to a new era of Sony's autofocus prowess, not just being best in class on paper, but also in throughput and actual functionality. So again, very similar cameras, but the autofocus capability definitely lives inside the 6400, but with the stated drawbacks that I have mentioned when compared to the, slightly more expensive now 6500 that, again, you must take with a grain of salt because the price of that camera is going to plummet, especially when Sony announces its successor, which will be either the A6700 or A7000. But I hope this addresses all of your questions, comments, concerns. Please feel free to post any questions or comments. Hit that like button, and as usual, please feel free to subscribe. Later.